Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final weekend of What is Consciousness? I'm James P. Barbieri, Associate Program Director of the Pari Center, and I'll be your host for today. So any problems, technical or not, feel free to just drop me a message in the chat. Before I begin, I'd just like to very briefly go through a couple of Zoom rules. I'm sure we know them already, but just a quick refresher. First of all, if you could all please turn off your microphone during the presentation and during the Q&A unless you're called upon. If we hear any background noise, we may mute you for this reason. But at the same time, encourage everyone to have their cameras on. In this session, we won't be screen sharing, so it'll be very nice to see everyone's faces and reactions. During Q&A and discussion, if you want to ask a question, use the raise your hand function, which is in the reactions at the bottom of your screen. Otherwise, if you feel shy, you can ask your question in the chat, which will be open throughout the session, and I can read it out for you. Finally, all sessions are recorded for archival purposes and for you all. The recordings will be available to you 3 days after this session, so Tuesday. And yeah, enough about rules. Let me introduce our speaker for today, Richard Baker Roshi. Richard is the founder and head teacher of the Dharma Sangha centers in the US and Europe, and the Dharma successor of Shunro Suzuki Roshi, who with him founded the Tesajara Zen Mountain Center in California. He has also founded the Green Gulch Zen practice community and farm in the Marin County and the Dharma Sangha. Today, Richard will give his presentation entitled The Inner Science, Experimental Investigation and Analysis of Consciousness. And with that, over to you, Richard. Very welcome to you.
Okay. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time it is you are. Yeah, normally, and has been my practice for 60 years, I like to, entering the associative field, just speak about the topic as it appears to me during the talk, and I find that the most interesting for me and creative way to do it. I always find it becomes different each time I have to speak, which is fairly often. But this morning, I woke up and I thought, you know, with all these people who aren't Zen practitioners, and maybe I should just write it. Maybe I should just read it. So I started this morning and I wrote out a text about the Five Skandhas, or about constructing consciousness. So, and I've very seldom had tried reading as if I were just making it up as I go along, which is in fact. So I'm going to try just reading and see how it goes, because I think actually it'll be more useful for you. So I have a text here, and I'm simply going to read it, but read it with as if I'm writing it now. So, beginning. This is consciousness, writing about consciousness. This is writing about consciousness. For a Buddhist, the essential definition of consciousness, the essentiality of consciousness, is that it is a construct. It is consciousness constructing itself. Consciousness constructing itself. If we know that this very convincing experience of consciousness, which we are in the midst of right now, is a construct, then we know that consciousness is our human actionable definition of the world, is our human actionable definition of the world. But that there is more to the world than consciousness shows us. And it is the more to the world that is the basis for and possibility for and means of realization of enlightenment, of the experience of enlightenment, which the historical Buddha brought into the world as a universal teaching 2,500 years ago, a teaching and experience that can make the world fully livable for a humanoid or a human. So how do we uncover, create, open, incorporate, actuate the possibilities, the potentialities of this there is more to the world than consciousness shows us? Defining consciousness, some definitions of consciousness. Consciousness is our actionable definition of the world. The word world here is a euphemism for all that is, the isness of the world that we is. There is no other alternative than that. Our own isness is also the isness of the world. Phenomenality and the world is one non-dual but distinguished isness. Realizing isness, and let's start with aliveness, realizing isness could be a definition of enlightenment. Continuing to define consciousness, consciousness is the main obstacle to enlightenment. Consciousness is the main obstacle to enlightenment. Consciousness is what we have to get around if we are going to see the world more closely, more accurately as it is. If we have to deconstruct consciousness, it certainly helps to deconstruct consciousness. If consciousness is a construct, then probably it can be deconstructed. Let's see. If we, the big I, can reconstruct consciousness, then consciousness is experienced as belonging to us, like a house we built with our own hands. By building our own consciousness, taking our own consciousness apart and rebuilding it, we feel more directly engaged with, more part of our experience. We feel more familiar with the world we live in and the world we are. And maybe we can know where the house ends and where the lawn and the forest begins. Maybe we can know then where the house ends and the lawn and the forest begins. And maybe we can really know how the house was once forest, the location of the forest, and the forest from which the trees were taken to build the house. Let's see. But consciousness is also the partner, the agency, the intentional means for dismantling consciousness, for deconstructing consciousness. Okay. If we are going to deconstruct, reconstruct, and reconstruct consciousness, we need to know what are the ingredients for we need to know what are the ingredients, the constituents of consciousness. 2,500 years ago, again, the five skandhas were invented by the Buddha and Buddhism. I think it is one of the greatest inventions of humankind and human kindness. The word skandha is most meaningfully translated as heaps or aggregates, something that piles up as separate piles, or something that can be herded into separate flocks, and which can be known separately and together simultaneously. 5 observable categories. I can name these 5 categories. The most effective English words that point effectively toward into the experience of these 5 categories are form, feelings, perceptions, associatives, sometimes it's impulses, intentions. I feel associatives is the closest, and consciousness. Form, feelings, perceptions, associatives, associative mind, and consciousness. And these are almost like a keyboard, a kind of riff you feel as you're acting and knowing the world. But consciousness appears instantly. Right now, everything is conscious here. I'm conscious of what's going on to some extent. But how can we allow this appearance and experience the successional dynamics of the appearance of consciousness? And how can we isolate and experience separately each of these categories from which consciousness is constructed? And we may discover, recognize that each of these categories is its own world, becomes its own world, its own territory of knowing, own territory of experience, and not just an ingredient of the experience and knowing of consciousness. The first 4 listed categories of the 5 skandhas extend knowing and extend experience beyond the knowing and experience of consciousness. Thus, and surprisingly, by deconstructing consciousness, we can extend the experience of knowing beyond the knowing of consciousness itself. This is a step toward realization. And knowing that consciousness is not the whole of knowing, and knowing that consciousness is not the whole of knowing, is also a step toward realization. So how do we notice these categories? First, we have to slow them down. We have to have an experience. We need to have an experience of them being slowed down. 2 friends have formed a group here in Freiburg, nearby, that regularly sing together in Russian. The other day, they were in the forest above Freiburg, responsibly, pandemically distanced from each other, singing together a Georgian folk song. At the same time, some Georgians by birth were walking by chance in the forest. And we can imagine at first they hear the singing in the distance and they wonder, is that singing? What is that sound? We can call that form, the first signal, the first skandha. It gives the native Georgians a funny feeling from childhood. They can't imagine what that sound is here in Germany. They have a feeling, but they cannot identify the feeling exactly. What is that? That is the second skandha, non-graspable feeling. Then one of them says to the other, you know, that really sounds like a Georgian folk song, I know. That percept, that cognition is the third skandha, perception. Form, feelings, perceptions. Then there is a flood of associations among them. One says, I know that folk song from school days. Another says, my parents and friends used to sing that song. In fact, I can see them all gathered together at the wedding of my cousin. These associations are the territory of the fourth skandha, associations, associative mind, the encyclopedic background of consciousness. Continuing their walk, they meet my friends, unexplainably singing Georgian folk songs in the Black Forest. The experience of that meeting and their walking and discussion is the fifth skandha, consciousness. This story, in which the successional noticing of the sound, the song, and the meeting is experientially stretched out, allows us to notice and understand how a percept turns into consciousness. It is a conceptually accessible, imaginable experience of a slowed down skandic development of consciousness. Now that is going on all the time. I look out the window at the agrarian landscape that the local farmers have created over generations. A windmill is turning. The horses and cows have been turned out to pasture. All these accumulate as a consciousness which will influence how I view and experience the rest of my day. I can feel it happening. In the experiential field of driving a car, this is also happening all the time. Even if it is happening very fast during driving. It must be a common experience for an undistracted driver to hold the scene of the road at useful levels of resolution, at specific skandic levels. For example, there may be several cars in sight, a cow loose on the road, two kids on bicycles, and a school bus making a turn. And the driver is just seeing it. If I am the driver, I can hold this sensorial field at this skandic level, this perceptual level, or I can let it go into associations. Remembering when I had to get out of a car and tell somebody to inform the farmer that his cow is loose on the road. Or perhaps I can remember when I almost had an accident in a similar situation. That memory may have a traumatic, physicalized dimension which I can stop because I'm present in the perceptual field before it turns into association, because I'm present in the perceptual field before it turns into associations, before it turns into the associative field. Through the attentional practice of the skandhas, one gets more and more power within the accumulative attentional fields leading to consciousness. Through the attentional practice of the skandhas, one gets more and more power within the accumulative attentional fields leading to consciousness. You find the power to stop the field at perception, or at associations, or at feeling. You feel an association forming, and you can let it form, or you can stop it forming, or reverse its forming, or erase it from the tabla. This is a big step toward freeing yourself from suffering, from associative suffering, from associative memory, because you know, really know, that the memory is not reality. It is only one of the constituents, one of the ingredients which accumulate and drive consciousness. So you're in the field of consciousness, you're in the field of association, of perception, of various kinds of knowing which lead to consciousness. But for you, it can be quite slowed down, even when everything is fast, because your attentional skills themselves slow down the world. This is all ordinary experience, but being able to explicitly experience it skandhically requires practice, meditation practice, and inner and outer mindfulness practice. What can we notice? What can we notice from this kind of experience? We all have similar experience, but unless you are a practitioner, your experience doesn't fall into, isn't felt as a developmental level of consciousness over which we have control, have supervision, have jurisdiction even. You're in the field of consciousness, the forming consciousness, and you feel you're participating in it, and it belongs to you, and you can decide how and pace its forming. One thing I can notice is the big I, the big agency I, is not the small comparative me identity. We can learn to feel and actuate this difference. This is also a big step toward freeing us from suffering, from the delusion of the world as mine and only mine. We can also notice that the constituents of consciousness, the aspects of consciousness, can be physicalized or be mentalized or be both at once. Trauma is a form of physicalization. Trauma is hard to control, hard to experientially differentiate, because the body is not well listened to by the mind. It's good to be able to separate the physicalized constituents and the mentalized constituents, for then you, the big I at least, can begin to listen to the voice of the body as well as the voice of the mind. Listen to the separate voices of the body, which know more than the much more edited mind. The practice of the Five Skandhas is to notice that and how consciousness accumulates and develops sensorially and experientially through the first four categories. The practice of the five skandhas is to notice that and how consciousness accumulates and develops sensorially and experientially through the first four categories. And then how that accumulation of the first four categories is conflated, abridged, and synopsized, especially the associative fourth skandha, into a hugely convincing, culturally believable, identity confirming, significantly delusive, actionable experience that we call consciousness. Buddhist wisdom and practice is how to undo the delusional and unduly convincing apparition of consciousness we call the five skandha, the fifth skandha. Let me read that paragraph again. The practice of the five skandhas is to notice that and how consciousness accumulates and develops sensorially and experientially through the first four categories. And then how that accumulation of the first four categories is conflated, abridged, and synopsized, especially the associative fourth skandha, into a hugely convincing, very convincing, hugely convincing, culturally believable, identity confirming, actionable experience, significantly delusive, actionable experience that we call consciousness. Buddhist wisdom and practice is how to undo the delusional and unduly apparitional, unduly convincing apparition of consciousness. Observing and naming the five skandhas is easy. Actualizing, examining, and discovering their possibilities is difficult, but is the center of Zen practice. Once you get used to, once you feel the presence of the five skandhas in most of your noticing and acting in the world, it becomes possible to rest at each one of the skandhas, and they cease to be layers of consciousness and become separate realms of knowing, not tied to cultural expectations, and certainly not tied in the same way as consciousness is, which is really about protecting us from tigers and such like. Once you get to know, get used to, and feel the presence of the five skandhas in all of your noticing, thinking, acting, it becomes possible to rest at each one of the skandhas, and they cease to be layers of consciousness and become separate realms of knowing, not tied to cultural expectations. Each skandha it becomes a window and sometimes a door. Each skandha is a window and sometimes a door into another field of isness, another kind of knowing with its own conditions, its own history, its own past, present, and future. There's layers of worlds hidden in the foundational development of consciousness. When you find out how to deconstruct and reconstruct consciousness, much of the mystery of the world becomes at least a little more closely felt. The form world, the first skandha, at a nano level, N-A-N-O, at a nano level of sensorial particularity and absorption. The word Zen basically means absorption. The form world at a nano level of sensorial particularity and absorption, a world noticed but not thought about, can become its own samadhi. One of the Dogen says that the word hishiryo, H-I-S-H-I-R-Y-O, which is usually translated commonly in English as non-thinking, really means to notice without thinking about. And this takes some training or intention or a mental posture. I'm going to notice, but I'm going to not think about, but I'll notice. So, and noticing without thinking about actually becomes another way of knowing with its own storage capacity, with its own way of storing this experience. And it's a knowing of it, which we usually call an intuition when it pops up at us, but it's not the same as the memory that we find through consciousness. So, the form world at a nano level of sensorial particularity and absorption, a world noticed but not thought about, can become its own samadhi, its own inclusiveness of all, without any particular resultant consciousness. Although not really scribable, I will write it as a gathered in physicality. A gathered in physicality, gathering in phenomenality as well, a form of bliss and knowing, not confirmable or rememberable by consciousness, but which unmistakably is experienced and transformational. This experience has not been far away, but it has been hidden in the foundational experiences of consciousness. The feeling only world is only feeling. There's a stepping back from any conceptualization. There is bathing and washing within feeling, and a discovery of feeling as a way of aliveness, as a way of knowing, which is not conceptual or conscious in a confirmable sense. We only think we know things when we feel them confirmed by consciousness, but much of knowing is happening, and it is known but not consciously confirmable. It is known and accumulates, but we can't check up on it in consciousness. And there is percept-only world, where everything is so precisely in its place and okay just as it is, that there's no stress and everything is given. The world is given to us. Everything is working, as Imada Roshi, my Rinzai teacher in Japan, said, the most important thing for a practitioner to know that at each moment the whole world is making this moment possible. You're being given and you can give back in this field. And there is the associative world, which stretches paratactically. That means side by side, not causally related necessarily. And there is the associative world, which stretches paratactically into all the details you have ever known and not known you have known. It is the world where, when, all thinking is intuitional, surprising, spontaneous, dreamlike, relevantly, insightfully dreamlike, creative. Okay, the 5 categories, the 5 constructive constituents, the 5 ingredients of consciousness require ripened attentionality to notice and attentional skills to experience as they are happening. The yogic world is a world where the primary dynamic is attentionality, not cognition. Of course, there's cognition, but the default position, the basic field of knowing is through attentionality, and attentionality develops in ways that are quite different from cognition. And attentional skill to hold in place while they're happening. The attentional skill to hold in place what is happening. In effect, you are time and you are space, and you can hold in time your own. You are time. You can't be out of time. You are time. And you can begin to hold a timelessness in place. To examine the potentialities of these constituent layers is skandha practice, to peel them away from the building site of consciousness, to peel them away from the building site of consciousness and hold them in place, in space, and then to examine them, requires somatic skills. And to free them, free each layer into its own potentialities, its own creativity, to free it into its own potentialities. And who knows where it will go? Who knows what might happen? This requires courage of open-ended knowing and the awakeness of indeterminacy. At each moment, there's not predictability. At each moment, there's indeterminacy. This is where all Buddhist aliveness starts. Yogic cultural aliveness starts with each moment is indeterminate. It's hard to get used to that, hard to have the courage of that if you're grown up wanting predictability, insurance and assurance. And to free each layer into its own potentiality, its own creativity, who knows where it will go, who knows what might happen, requires the courage of open-ended knowing and the awakeness of indeterminacy. And that courage of open-ended knowing happens when you really find your own aliveness is a column of stability. Your spine is at the center of the world. How does one get these skills? How does one get these skills? Well, we have the wisdom of knowing consciousness is a construct, free of inherency, free of own being, free of own becoming. And we have the fruit of the wisdom of Buddhism, the profounding categories of the Five Skandhas. And now we need, too, the skill of micro-sensorial attentionality. I don't know how else to describe it. The skill of micro-sensorial attentionality and the somatic skills of inner stillness. Stillness just becomes part of how you are, of imperturbable inner stillness. It is possible, if it's possible, and it is possible. But how? Well, meditation, well understood, well experienced, autodidactically explored and examined, and functionally, intuitively, and smartly drawing on the generational practices, the multi-generational practices of Buddhism. Simple things, explored as fully as possible, flower into knowable and unknowable complexities. The simplicity of seeds becoming roots, plants, forests becoming air, the troposphere becoming human life, all sentience, all our allness listening to gravity. Here we are. Hey. Simple things like letting the hands speak to each other in the jhana mudra during meditation. And the gasho, and in the gasho mudra of bowing during activity. And feeling the hands listening to each other. Your hands always know where the other hand is. And they're talking to each other, but it's not ordinarily audible. But in yogic practice, you begin to feel the presence of the hands in the world as a kind of incorporated physicality, inclusive incorporated physicality. There is no moment when the hands are not listening and speaking, but their inaudible pulse, cadenced within phenomenality, is for our bodily ears and not our auditory ears. Simple things like discovering, I'm answering the question, but how? Simple things like discovering sitting still, really still, and finding that stillness is present for us, can be present for us, a present to us all the time. Fundamental stillness is not limited to the experiential field of meditation, to the field of zazen absorption, but this fundamental stillness is most certainly, most likely discovered in zazen. And it's how we really enter the yogic world, the bodily, phenomenalized yogic world. is discovered in Zazen, in meditative absorption, and made one's own anatomy in Zazen. One's anatomy is also the space of the body. The exterioceptive space and the interioceptive space are both and all experienced as anatomy during Zazen. If I lift my body from in Zazen, using this posture as an example, if I lift my body from above the hips, it creates a space in the chest, my chest, which then becomes part of my anatomy, and it affects the whole of my body, the way my lungs and other organs affect my body. And so the space, that lifting space, as it settles the whole body, is really best understood as part of our anatomy, as the space under my arms is part of our anatomy. It is non-graspable anatomy that allows physical anatomy to speak. It's called yoga as a worldview. Simple things, too, like attentionality extended to space, to enacting our own space and time, to non-universal, non-Newtonian space and time, enacting non-universal, non-Newtonian space and time, not taken for granted, universalized space and time. If you think time is somehow universal and out there, this is it's common sense, we tend to feel that way, but it's a delusion which makes realization almost impossible. And if you think of space, Newtonian space, container space, as something you're in but not creating, it also is a huge impediment to realization. Simple things like attentionality extended to space, to enacting our own space and time, put us into the world pretty closely to how the world actually is, how it is really ising. Just now, do you hear it? Ising? And more simple things like recognizing mental postures, attitudes, views, the eightfold wisdom implementing path, the eightfold path, the eightfold wisdom implementing path begins with right views, perfecting views, all making views, or maybe whole making views, but it's a wholeness without boundaries. Noticing that our mental postures, our views, are more than consciousness. Views may be formed in consciousness, may be formed in our ethical and compassionate intentionality, but they function beyond consciousness and in and around consciousness. Let's form them in consciousness, but let's apply them, enact them, intend them in the whole body, earth body, as Dogen says. Let's form the mental posture that the whole earth is the true human body, as Dogen says. So I had to stop somewhere, so I decided to stop there. And I don't know, I wonder if reading this text was more accessible or less, but it's what I did, so.
Thank you so much, Richard, for that. That was an incredibly thoughtful presentation you gave there, and thank you so much for.
All right, it was thoughtful enough, yes.
Shantena is the chair of this event. Would you like to comment on what was said?
Yes, Richard Baker. Real pleasure meeting you.
Oh, thanks.
And sensing your energy in your words. Questions come up. And maybe the first question that comes up to me is, you mentioned consciousness being a construct. And if I understand it correctly, being a construct out of the five skandhas.
Yeah, those are the categories.
But also you said consciousness is one of the five skandhas.
Yes.
Could you clarify that?
Okay. Well, I think consciousness is created by our senses and so forth, but the five skandhas are asking us, like you were kind of an architect perhaps, to notice that when you see something, and form itself can be a meditation. When you see something, it very quickly, or not in ordinary time, becomes a feeling and becomes a percept, and then opens associations, and those together make consciousness, but consciousness then can be reversed and you can undo it. So they're kind of contained. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know how else to say it, but they are, consciousness is, maybe just simply, like you're pointing out, consciousness is constructed from the first four, but it's also constructed from my wanting to construct it.
Okay, yes. Also, I'm curious and interested. The sense in which you use the word consciousness is quite different from some of other views we've heard throughout.
Oh, for sure.
And one classic way to talk about it is like it's condensed in the phrase, "What is it like to be a bat?" For example.
Yeah, I know that little book.
Would you point out or clarify the difference between the sense in which you use consciousness and this more, let's say, classic in modern philosophy view of consciousness?
Well, there's so many definitions of consciousness, including, usually it's often all knowing, and awareness is a form of consciousness, or called consciousness. That's not how I feel. And of course, I've come to this place because, how can I be fairly simple here? Because when, for example, okay, I'm walking along a street and I trip on something, some ice, I'm carrying some packages, and I fall. And yet I catch myself, I don't get hurt, and I had a glass pitcher in one of the packages and it doesn't break. Okay, there's a lot of information there. Some kind of awareness knew that the glass pitcher was there and knew that I was falling on the sidewalk in New York City and wherever it was at that time. And that happened in nanoseconds, right? Much faster than consciousness. So what I discovered through meditation and practice is that awareness, which is always present, almost like a guardian angel or something, always present, is not consciousness. It's not confirmable. It just happens. So what I discovered is I had to make a distinction between awareness and consciousness, and I used the SCI within the English word consciousness, which is like scissors to cut. The cut up world is consciousness. The world of awareness, which evolves, develops, and becomes more and more present through meditation process and through developing stillness. So for me, it was just a practical need, and particularly sharing practice with others, to make a distinction between awareness and consciousness.
Okay.
And so consciousness is an actionable mode of functioning in the world, and a particular way to retain your experience. And I've discovered and the whole concept of the alaya vijnana, which I won't go into, it's another way of knowing the world, which has its own way to retain experience. That's enough. Thank you very much for your comments.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your insightful answers. Let me point out one more thing that really struck me. And you mentioned like the indeterminacy which is present in each moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a quantum physicist by training, so indeterminacy has like strong resonances for me.
Yeah.
Is there any connection there?
Is there what?
Any connection
Between physics and?
between the indeterminacy which is there in each moment?
Well, but
The indeterminacy which is there.
Buddhism assumes that everything is changing. So everything is an activity. There are no entities. And so unfortunately or fortunately, physics gives us a lot of language which can be used to describe a meditative or absorptive experience, but it's, I'm not a physicist. I considered doing it once, and at one point maybe I should have done it, but I became a Zen practitioner instead. But certainly indeterminacy or change or impermanence is the basic stance of all of yogic Buddhism. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions, but I want to leave it open, to open it up to people who
All right.
Well, thank you, Shantin and Richard, for that great line of questioning. Maybe we can come back to it later. Richard, before we open up, are you comfortable just going ahead, or would you rather have a short break?
Well, no, we're in the midst of it now, so, let's see what happens.
Let's open it up then. As I said earlier, to ask a question, use the raise your hand function, or you can write it in the chat if you're feeling shy, or physically raise your hand. We've got many questions. I can see, let's take the first one from Joy.
Oh, I think Sharon had her hand up first. I'll wait for her. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, sure, Sharon then.
Thank you, Joy. You pay a lot of attention. I have a question around association, and there are two questions I have associated with the question around association. So I wonder if you can help me understand how to work with associations that I know are inaccurate, right? That are really not so. And the example that I'll give you is that, so during the earlier days of COVID, we were, cautioned to clean every surface and you can't touch anything and all of that stuff, right? And, as it moves on, we understand that that was not the way that COVID was transmitted, and one does not need to be afraid of those things in the way that we originally thought. It's okay to go out in the world. And yet I find it difficult, even though I'm aware of that, and I'm even aware of the process in my mind as it's happening. Oh, I see that fear comes up, and I know that that fear is not true, right? It's not appropriate. And yet I can't interrupt that association, right? Or disconnect that association. So that's the first application of this that I'm wondering about. And then the second application that I'm wondering about is more about how we might be able to, or is it possible for us to be able to influence others around this? And the thought is around a person who is a...
Let's stay with the first one first, okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's the stickiness and protectiveness of consciousness. It's decided, been informed that touching surfaces is dangerous, so it is still trying to protect you. That's all. Now, how do you break that connection? Well, I think the more you have what I call an experience of the world as a successional path. In other words, at each moment you arrive and there's no past and future. That is happening outside of consciousness, because consciousness wants to make the world predictable. So it'll make the world predictable even if the predictions are wrong. So you have to step out of consciousness into a successional experience of the world, and then eventually, and it takes a while, not so long, but probably a few months anyway, of actually intentionally finding each moment successional. And at some point you break and that's one of the main ways Buddhism can say you're free of emotional and psychological suffering. So what's the second part of what you brought up?
Very much. I wrote that down. I'm going to work with that. Thank you.
Okay.
The second is, so I'm thinking about a individual in America who has an association in his or her brain that says people of color are dangerous and people of color are less than I am, or that association. Yeah. Well, we know that not to be true. Is there any way that from the outside one can work with that individual in dialogue or practice to begin to help them break that association, and with the understanding that it might not even be a conscious, it's not necessarily a conscious thought, it's an immediate association that they have. It's one of those instantaneous things that happen.
Well, we're tribal beings, right? We tend to have more connectivity with our own children than any child. So you have to kind of practice with that. I mean, I certainly have more, I have 3 daughters. I certainly have more connection with my 3 daughters, more information, more experience, but I try to look at each child the same. When I notice it comes up that I give preference to this or that, I try to cut off the preferences and just look at every child as if it could be my child. In Tibetan Buddhism, you look at every person as if it was your mother in a past life. It's the same kind of experience. Zen does not emphasize reincarnation, is not interested really. No teaching depends on reincarnation in Zen. But still, this effort to see each thing independently at this moment is at the center of Zen practice. And we're herding animals, as I said the other day to someone. It's kind of hard to herd cats, right? Supposedly. I've never tried herding cats. But we are herdable beings. I mean, otherwise, that's what armies are about. If we weren't herdable, you couldn't have armies. You couldn't tell somebody, go out and shoot or let them shoot you. No, I mean, we're herdable. But that herdable can be used because it's the root of feeling the world in a cadenced pulse. And so anyway, that's something else. Someone else?
No, it has some clues in there about how to approach that. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Sharon. Next question will come from, back to Joy.
Thank you. Wow, it's kind of like impossible to ask a question because then it's thoughts. But I really like how you were describing process. And now, I don't know, did you say process? I think you did. And something that I appreciate very much about Italy is the love of beauty and the experience of beauty. And I'm in the San Francisco area. And in the US, we say, oh, that was good. But in Italy, they say that's beautiful. And to me, that seems more connected to process, whereas good is more of it's like a moral word, a morality word. And then you said that there's intelligence in process. So I was just wanting to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, I wore the wrong pants and they're rather tight and they've cut off my circulation a bit, but I'm doing okay, don't worry. Yeah, the words you use to talk about the world, each word is a mental posture. Since there's no svabhava, there's no inherency, as Buddhism assumes, well, there's genetic, you have certain dispositions from your family, etc. But basically, to view the world as having no inherency, no svabhava, is at the center of Buddhism. So, So you can choose how you're going to describe the world. You can choose to find ways to be compassionate. Instead of, am I a compassionate person? No, you decide intentionally to practice compassion. So people say they're going to go do Zazen, for instance. And I say, no, it's probably better to say you're going to discover Zazen. Because if you do Zazen, it's like you're going to do some pattern you already know. And I love Italian restaurants because if the cook is any good, at each meal, you discover the meal, you discover eating. And so I would say, when people say, I'm going to do Zazen, I even say it to myself, I'm going to do Zazen, but I mean, I'm going to discover Zazen because at each moment, meditation is something, who knows? So I like the Italian way of saying, oh, that's beautiful. And I'll start practicing it right now. Thank you for your beautiful question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Next question will come from Valjean. You're just muted.
There we go. Sorry. Thank you so much. I felt that just that contemplative, how do you say contemplative experience was everything that you said, that what you said came out of your experience of contemplation. And I think actually you just answered my question, which was, do you make qualitative decisions about what you are going to give your attentionality?
I actually, if I really talk about what I do, as much as possible, I make no mental choices. I make all bodily choices. If I were going to wear a tie, for instance, I take the first tie my hand touches. Or if I'm going to do something or other, I tend to let the whatever appears in my mind, it comes from my body though, it appears in my mind, I'll have a cracker. Well, I don't say, geez, I'd rather have a cookie. I have a cracker. So that listening to the body, as I noticed it years and years ago, when I was first starting to practice, that my body knew I was going to do something before my mind did. And then my mind would start making the decision. And Benjamin Libet discovered that actually the body, if you measure the body, the body before there's about a percentage of a second before consciousness. If you hook the body up to sensors, the body is starting to move before consciousness has made the decision. So you can actually, as part of yogic practice, more and more turn over the decisional process to the informational field that's accumulated by the body, which is more sensitive and less culturally edited than consciousness. So I mean, sometimes I do make intentional, conscious thought through decisions, but most small decisions I try to I see what happens, I do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I trust my aliveness.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yes, thank you. I certainly am thankful for my aliveness because I was victim of a hit and run accident yesterday.
Oh my gosh.
And in terms of it,
you're looking pretty well.
Oh yes, nothing happened to me, but that was my first assessment. I'm fine. The dog's fine. The car's, well, yeah. But my first reaction, of course, as you just said, was a bodily reaction. I didn't even think. I had stopped for some teenagers. There were 5 teenagers that were in the middle of the road with their bicycles. And a car came speeding around the curve, and not to hit them, of course, came on my side of the road. The only thing that really troubled me at the end, because I was very angry after, was he didn't stop. But all that disappeared because when I turned around, realizing, well, I've just come from my garage. Now I have to go back to it. And as I turned around, there was a woman, and she held part of the plastic thing from a retrovisor of the side mirror that had come down on the road. And it was such a nice gesture and caring gesture, and all the anger just disappeared.
Well, I would suggest you're might be a good yogic practitioner.
Thank you, Belgian, for your question. I'm really sorry to hear about yesterday. Guru Charan.
Yes, thank you. Roshi, you have a very hypnotic voice.
Oh my goodness.
And you have an energetic presence for my heart. And these two together invites me to an awareness space that I well recognize. So I have a few questions, I guess, comments about what you said.
Okay.
Putting aside longer conversation, but a few questions.
Well, so, maybe we'll meet one day.
It would be lovely. We already have, of course, but I mean, physicality.
Okay.
So, so here's a few points. I find in my own practice, many things, that it's useful to have at least 3 words. Awareness to me, well, consciousness, excuse me, constructed, it's the world of parts, complexity, wholeness emerging in a physics sense, okay? And we
Yeah.
have that capacity. It's not a problem. It's not something to fight. It's something that you hone, train, and align. And then there's what you're talking about, the unseeable, the thing that you can't grasp and reduce, that you can't report by particular language, although we always try, of course. And that's not conscious. That's a place, call it merger. Sometimes I just call it sentience to mean a base of just being like that. And when these two come together, it's awareness. Awareness is a particular state of continuous flow that holds what in different traditions we'll call freedom, free will, choice, unique self, but it's not a thing. And it's a constant process of a whole universe. So whether or not on that point, then, when you said, follow your body, which I totally relate to, the embodied awareness. But I always say you need to have wholeness, somatic intelligence, because you have to distinguish, like the skandhas, between impulse and wholeness, where the whole heart or the whole body and not just a part or a pile pulls you. So you don't always go by the pulls, but you notice, same word I use, aliveness in a very tangible, awake kind of manner. And the last comment is, of course you can relate physics to this in a way. I don't jump and label everything quantum because it's kind of crazy when you do that, but I actually work with quantum physics. And so I find there is a resonance, like in the Pari group, with the Bohemian idea, where there's enfolding and unfolding, where there's a kind of dynamic that is aliveness itself, perhaps. And now we know in the last few years that there is such a thing as wholeness that you can't describe or break down, but is active as an element that affects all the parts. So it's interesting. I think what you're describing, if I were to bridge those two, is this a merger that comes out in an alive, spontaneous, kind of amazing way, recognizable as you act. So just like your comments, I do hope to meet you. I love what you said.
Okay. Well, I love what you said too. So this is great. Thank you. We're on the same page in many books.
Thank you, Guru Charan, for your comments. Really insightful. Next question will come from Ilana.
Yeah, David Bohm said, thought has to become proprioceptive. And that's a very interesting question for me. Thought is obviously happening in the domain of consciousness. Proprioception, where is it happening? It's also happening to some extent in consciousness, but it's probably more what you described, and that's what I see too, in the domain of awareness, which is on a, if you like, on a higher level, on a completely different level from consciousness. What could you say about this idea for our present world situation, that thought has to become proprioceptive in the sense of really becoming aware what's happening in the body, what the body is telling you?
Yes. Is that good enough?
Yes. Thank you. That's good enough.
But the word proprioceptive is quite useful, and I feel I use it a lot. But for me, the sense of the as well as the successional path, I speak about the gestural path. In other words, if really we're not in a Newtonian container space or universal time space, then everything is creating everything all at once. Everything is a process, an activity. And so it is very helpful to get to know proprioceptive space or gestural space. And in Zen practice, what are often called rituals are really ways to enact space. So if I bow, for instance, we have a custom at our meditation centers that every time you pass somebody, you greet them with a bow. Okay, well, what is a bow? Well, and there's, as I've said the other day, to somebody, often people put their hands together rather flat, but practice is to put your hands together and the thumbs are like little doors and you have a space between your hands, a little tiny space. And some Buddha statues will have a little ball in the palm of the hand. And so you begin to, if you put your hands together, not flat, which is some kind of mental idea, but just put them together, that little space in the palms begins to warm up, like in a healer's hands. And the rim of your hand begins to kind of vibrate. And after a while, you really feel your hands talking to each other. There's almost a spongy material between your hands. And so that when you bow to somebody, you're actually enacting a gestural space where you take hold of the exterioceptive expressions of the Sangha, of the chakras, and bring them up through the body. And in our particular case, we don't stop at the heart chakra. We bring it up through the heart chakra and then bow into the space, the shared space. And as someone brought up, is there some earlier, is the ways you influence each other? Well, you're in this shared gestural proprioceptive space. And if you bring this up and then allow yourself to disappear into the space, and the other person disappears in the space, this space is almost part of your anatomy. And one is checking up on it all the time by how the spine feels, whether the spine feels like it's connecting heaven and earth or not, etc. So that's enough on proprioceptive. But I really like David Bohm's work. I even met him once or twice years ago. And but I'm a great admirer of the work, as a physicist, and what his work has been extended to in how to think about and act in the world. Okay. My responses are too long, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lana. No, your answers are great. Thank you for it. Thank you. We'll take next question from Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Sorry. Thank you, John. I didn't realize I was so close to the start of the queue, so I didn't unmute myself. I just wanted to respond to something which Zentatsu has just said, which and also, of course, to thank him for absolutely fascinating, wonderful exposition. I think that, in fact, all ritual at some level involves dealing with space in some way. Yes. Across all cultures, although I think the way that it is characteristic of the particular tradition that from the heart of which he's speaking in Zen is particularly powerful. But at some level, I think almost all ritual involves dealing with space in that way, and that sort of just strikes me as a very powerful recognition. The other thing I would just want to say very quickly is just to echo something which Guru Churan, I do hope I'm pronouncing your name more or less as you would want me to, Guru Churan, but something that Guru Churan said, which is that what you said about the notion of successional dynamics and of living in accordance of, our experience of living in time as a succession, as it were, of present timeless moments. I'm probably I'm sorry, I didn't mean to try and put words in your mouth, but what you had said about that did strike me as resonating very, very powerfully with this central idea that is in David Boehm's work, of the unfolding, enfolding activity of what he called the implicate order, how the explicate order, our kind of immediate awareness of the present and of our environment and things around us, comes out of that continual, well, continual is even the wrong word because it already implies some kind of dimension of temporality, but this fundamental self-activity of the enfolding and unfolding of what he called the hollow movement, and what you said about successional dynamics seemed to me to connect in a very powerful way with that. Anyway, my apologies for a long-winded observation, and I guess that there isn't really a question in there, for which I apologize, but I just again like to say how very deeply I appreciated your words.
Okay. We accept your apology and appreciation, both of us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for your comments. Just seeing if anyone has their hand up. Not for now, but I I did actually receive a anonymous question from the chat that maybe you could. It's a quite straightforward question, and it has been partially addressed already. But I thought you could maybe say a little bit more about the relationship or difference between knowing and consciousness.
Okay. Well, I use knowing to, it's an English word, right? I use it to mean all forms of experience which affect us and stay with us, but we don't. We know some things we know through consciousness, but there's a lot we know. For instance, simultaneity, dreams, etc. This is not happening through consciousness. It's happening through some kind of knowing or patterns that the way we live call forth. And I just use knowing to mean all forms of experience that affect us, and particularly which we retain, but not necessarily consciously or through the usual way, the usual way we experience memory and try to call forth memories. These are, I mean, it's somewhat like Proust, the involuntary memories that come forth. And I think much of what Proust tried to describe for a meditator is, you know, at some point, all thinking becomes intuitional. It's a flow of intuitions which arise from a complexity of associations and not through cognitive, conceptual, comparative consciousness. Okay? Maybe we've run out, maybe I've said everything I should say today, and
No, this is all great. Thank you, Richard, for answering that question.
You're a very positive guy.
What can I say?
Thank you.
Always look on the bright side. That's what I say.
Well, as long as you're not in that movie.
Actually have another
where
question.
the song occurs.
Yeah, the Life of Brian.
Yeah.
We have another questions popped up from Joy again. Then if you want to ask it, Joy.
Oh, yes. Okay, so I didn't want to ask you too many questions before, but now, since there's space, I have worked a lot with adolescents with severe trauma in the last year. And so I was quite interested in your comment about trauma, what that does from, I guess, a Zen Buddhist perspective. And I'm just wondering if you could say a little more. I'm not sure if I quite got it. I think what I heard was that you were saying it's like a schism between the body and brain, which I think is, that's very close to how psychology views it, or how, what would a Buddhist perspective recommend, I guess? I'd be interested in that.
Yeah. Well, I would, first of all, not necessarily say Buddhist, because I would say yogic, because I'm using yogic to mean the world in which the phenomenality of the world is one interprocessive field. And you can make a distinction, sentient and insentient and so forth, but at you could even conceptualize it as a molecular level, atomic level, there's connectivity, but there's also connectivity that's happening when you find yourself more gesturally in tune with how the world functions through patterns. Okay, so I don't think there's any specific, in fact, trauma is a fairly new idea in Western psychology. I don't think that Buddhism comments on trauma, but the fact that we retain, if you've I've driven with a number of people who've had previous car accidents, and for the several years after their car accident, if there's any similarity to the situation in which they had the accident, they get quite frightened and ask me to drive differently, or et cetera. So it's built into the body, but it still is it's only a constituent. And if you can let me speak about about my early experience with people who contracted AIDS. In San Francisco, I was living in San Francisco before AIDS was called AIDS or HIV, and there's just people were dying in the local, particularly gay community, and when they and at an early point, people knew that it was a death sentence fairly quickly, 1 or 2 years or something like that in those days, and people were quite frightened. I mean, you'd get the prognosis, and naturally it was very frightening. But Isan Dorsey and I I helped him start, change the Hartford Street Zendo into maybe the first hospice for for AIDS people. So we met a lot of AIDS. I met a lot of people when they first found out they had AIDS, and when they were HIV positive, and when they, after a month or 2 months or a year, began to just accept it. Well, at first they were all, of course, almost everyone, frightened, terrified, really. But after they got used to it, that, well, yes, the prognosis is not good, but this just was a mental formation. The prognosis was just a mental formation. And they were alive, they were breathing, they weren't dead yet. And so at some point, they found themselves free of all those mental formations that had just been cultural before and all kinds of expectations and who they were and their identity, they were freed from all these mental formations, all the svabhava of inherency, and they suddenly were more joyful than they'd ever been in their life. So most of our suffering comes from these, we're suffering from our conceptions. If you're alive, you might as well, wherever you're alive, if you're driving a car or walking or waiting for a dentist, you're just alive. That's good enough. But the mental formations are where you suffer. So these people with AIDS suddenly had no mental formations. They were gone. So they were free in a way that actually I'm not suggesting you get AIDS in order to get free, but meditation and the mental postures which allow you to practice a success, what I call the successive path, again, a successional path, can free you. So at each moment, there's no ideas about what's going on. There's no comparisons. And there's a kind of joy just in being alive. And if you can move in that direction with these teenagers, the trauma can dissolve, but it's very, very hard because it gets all caught up in their identity and who they are and et cetera. And I don't know, but it's better to be traumatized, I would say, than to be clinically, medically crazy, because trauma can be kind of dissolved or worked around. Mm-hmm. So, quite a few people who practice with us their specialty is trauma, and they find Zen practice helps them work with clients who are impeded by traumatic experience and memories. I don't have much more to say about that than that. That's just kind of, excuse me, a kind of uninformed muddle. Excuse me.
Well, it was a very interesting muddle. Thank you. And I worked with HIV positive AIDS clients. I had a group for a year at a clinic in Portland, Oregon, and that was in the mid to late 90s. And they got so tired of all the bad news and the grief that when I asked them, well, what shall we do? They said, we want to have a celebration of AIDS Day. And so we did. So we posted posters all around the neighborhood, and people of course didn't come because it was a little outside their I guess boundaries, but they had a great time. And we did drumming circles, we did Reiki, we did anything we could that any of us had any kind of a talent in, and it was really a wonderful experience in the midst of all that.
Well, I'm 85, and mm-hmm. when I was in my 70s, as I've mentioned occasionally recently, I felt, geez, statistically, I'm supposed to die sometime in this decade, but then I've lived, and I've gotten past most of the things that kill you, and so I'm now feeling there's no end point. I mean, I know an exception is not going to be made in my case, but I'm not thinking about endpoints. As long as I'm alive, it's fine. So, and I'm very much enjoying being here with all of you.
Great.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Joy. A few questions have popped up. We'll go next to Manfred.
My question goes in that direct direction: construction, reconstruction, and deconstruction. So you used 5 skandhas, which is form, feelings, perception, uh,
Associations.
association and consciousness.
Yeah.
And then you used a very interesting term called non-graspable feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And in my world, this non-graspable feeling, or I call it non-graspable consciousness, is around everything. It's not a step inside. It's something we have no conscious access to. And I was a little bit confused because when you use it as a step, it's inside of consciousness, or consciousness, not outside of consciousness. Could you please clarify that for me?
Well, I probably can't clarify it, but I can say something. Generally, the tradition has called the second skandha neutral feeling, pleasurable feeling, or displeasurable feeling. I don't think that is very useful at least in how this is felt through English words, nor do I think it's very useful in how we experience ourselves these days in this century. And so non-graspable feeling, I would agree, is what noticing, using the second skandha as a way of noticing that, for instance, hearing the Georgian song in the distance, you don't know what it is, but it's some kind of information, but you can't distinguish it. That opens you to that noticing in that category. It's just a way, it's kind of way, it's not a thing. There's no entities. It's not a thingness. It's just something I'm pointing to as something we can notice. So you're noticing that non-graspable feeling is part of our functioning. And by that noticing, you begin to notice that everything, just as you said, is non-graspable feeling. And so, and it's not wordable. So the five skandhas become a way, in this case, that the second skandha is a way to not only notice how consciousness develops from form, perception, form, feeling, perception, but it's also a way to introduce you separately, experientially, to the knowing that arises through non-graspable feeling, because even though you can't grasp it, you are affected by it. And you can allow that affection, that experience to become more and more part of your existence, so that all the time you're functioning and feeling. And that is a more subtle way, in my experience, to function than through conceptual noticing. Okay, Manfred?
Yeah, thank you very much. Help me.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you, Manfred. It's great to see you. Next question will come from Gary.
Thank you so much for this talk. I put a number of comments into the chat. I'm wondering about, it really links back to my question, and that is the relationship between meta consciousness as reportable consciousness. Can you hear me? I mean, my meta, okay.
Yeah, we missed the first. Sorry.
For a moment there, you turned into a Martian, and you were speaking in funny.
Yeah, my internet was unstable.
Okay.
So no, I mean, let's just put it briefly. I mean, if we accept Thomas Nagel's definition of consciousness as what it feels like to be something,
yeah,
then it has nothing to do with language. It has to do with feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And one could say that that the five skandhas are the pathway from consciousness to meta-consciousness. That is the pathway from consciousness that we feel internally but cannot report to consciousness that we can report. And if you come back to Libet's experiment, I mean, it's fascinating because I very much am familiar with that. Basically, what Libet is saying is that the brain is already acting before we're aware. Now,
That's
but
that's the experience of meditation as well.
But it's reportable awareness. It's before a person actually can tell you that they're about to move.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is there a consciousness of the initiative to move that is happening well before this action emerges into reportable meta-consciousness?
Well, I don't want to turn things into entities. Okay. But I find that I find my functioning is in a field of knowing that extends more sensitively and inclusively within the world than I can have any conceptual understanding of how it happens. But let's say it's where coincidences appear and strange, you phone somebody and they just were phoning you and things like that. There's so many. I mean, I pick up a book. I'm looking for a particular thing, and I pick up a random book, and I find it. Something's going on that's making connections that's beyond conceptualization or even ordinary imagination. But I don't think it's magic or something. It's a mystery, but it's not something that we have in Buddhism a feeling of a term called the intermediate world. In other words, anomalous things happen, but it's wiser not to make theories about them, but just to notice these anomalies happen and live a life which allows the anomalous to keep surprising you. Is that okay, Gary?
I would call that the matrix of meaning.
Yeah, I can't hear you because you've become a Martian again.
Oh, no, he's frozen.
I would call that the matrix. Okay.
No, you're okay now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I understand.
The matrix of meaning is what Bohm called significance, or when he constructed this idea of soma significance. Soma is the physicality, significance is the relational component of our existence, which we feel, but we can't necessarily articulate in language.
That's right.
And what's interesting about the relational is that you communicate relationally.
Yeah. So practice, from my point of view, Zen practice is how to let yourself into that relational field and trust it.
Completely agree.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Gary, and thank you for contributing so much to the chat. It's great. I guess we just have 10 minutes left, so maybe we'll take one more question, maybe two. I can see Dave has his hand up. Dave Schrum.
Hi, David.
Oh, sorry, it just muted at the moment.
You have to unmute.
Dave, you're muted.
There we are. Yes. So firstly, I very much enjoyed your talk. It was very full, very informative, and very thoroughgoing in the area that it covered, and it will take me some time to digest it. It may take me a moment to digest the question I'm trying to form, but just let me go slowly. We began with consciousness as a construct. And I think, I mean, that's great, and exploring that. And the first skandha is form. And you can see a construct as being made of forms, really. Now, but then we moved into really, as I understood it, consciousness is perhaps more deeply a process than it is a form. Could we move to that?
Well, everything's an activity, so form is processive. There's nothing that's not an activity in my experience and understanding. Yeah. So form is a process, a stone is a process, this teaching staff is a process, my picking it up is a process, consciousness is a process. And so the five skandhas are ways to enter into the process of consciousness forming, and you can undo it into awareness, like there's a pyramid that comes down from consciousness to form, and then there's the relation, not reality, but relationality. The relationality of form is on some level, we could call it awareness, and the pyramid can also start the other way. Can start at consciousness and go down to, etc. You can think of it in various imagistic ways that are useful, but I think most of you have expressed to me is a kind of real sense of how this is our experience.
Now, I'm just still forming the question. Okay, so can I continue a bit?
Yeah, sure.
So now I'm feeling consciousness much more as a flow, as a process. And the feeling I have about flow is that flow moves along, like it's continuous but altering, yes? And it seems to me if I sit with a flow for a while, I begin to have the feeling that it's not so much a continuity, but it's a recurrent emergence.
That's what I would say too.
So then the thing that really interests me is, what is the ground out of which it's emerging?
It is itself the ground. If you have the idea there's a ground behind it, you're really, this is a theocratic idea. There's no creator space. There's only the isness, the thusness, the isness of everything all at once.
Well, okay, I would question that just a little bit, not in an absolute way, but as in actually practically entering into something, into a flow, and the sense that it is emergent from something, because I think that we often find things that seem to be states or flows or continuous are emergent from something.
Yes.
And we maybe work our way down through these by discovering that what seems continuous or static is emergent. I'm not trying to posit, a God behind it or something, but I guess what I'm more looking at is there perhaps a level of this at which we can see form or a primal movement out of which the more superficial movements arise, some sort of primary movement, or it just...
Well, I prefer, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just playing with this with you. I'm not...
and I'm playing too.
Oh, good. That's wonderful. That's the best way. Okay, well, you saying that gave me a feeling in the heart. Now, that immediately gives me some kind of answer to the question that I can't verbalize. But, you know, I'm playing with you now.
Okay.
Yes. So, but maybe I should leave it there unless you have a further word to say. But you see, I think we're entering into a different territory, which is not logically discursive now, in which maybe we can move into things in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, we need a reference point. The Dharma mean everything is changing, but the word Dharma means what holds. So, but the reference point doesn't have to be a cosmic reference point or something outside the situation. Things are relational, and one thing can be a reference point for the other. So I experience breathing as a reference point. I experience my spine, the spine as a reference point. I experience and I establish a sense of reference points of various degrees of subtlety or noticeability, but there's no within this field of relationality. There doesn't need to be a reference point outside the field of relationality. Within the ground, there's no ground of being. Otherwise, and that's what the meaning of the usefulness of the word emptiness is.
Right. So then we have on one side the whole relational field, and we have on the other side maybe what you've called emptiness for lack of.
Well, the relational field is emptiness. So in other words, absence is a relational experience to presence, or presence can be a relational experience, a reference point for absence. But the phrase that's used for centuries now is form is exactly emptiness, and emptiness is exactly form, because all arise through relationality and not through a ground of being somewhere.
Sorry.
It's interesting that they arise, though, you see.
Yes, because everything's an activity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, not because, it just is, for some reason, an activity. The isness, the thusness.
Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
Yeah.
Discussion this, and I really hope that we can discuss this further at a later stage, but we do have, it's basically time, so I guess we should start closing this session. Richard, would you have any final comments you want to give us before we finish?
Well, I'm just glad that reading this didn't seem to be a complete failure, and not sharing familiar vocabulary with you. My responses were a little bit clumsy, I think, but I really like the feeling of all of you, and it's a great pleasure for me to be in your screened presence.
Well, it's been really great to have you, Richard. Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you for all of you who have contributed to this.
It's the sound of no hands clapping.
Yes, that's it. It's this. Yes, just before we go, I'd just like to give two announcements. Well, first of all, hope to see you all tomorrow. You may have heard about Ian McGilchrist's session that has had to be postponed. So instead, we will have the closing panel discussion, where we will have, Richard again. We will have Valerie Hardcastle, Gary Lackman, Roderick Main, Pavel Pilkanen, and Berit Zabriskie, where they will all be discussing the various topics that have been popped up and emerged this past month during this series. And so they will be asking, they'll be discussing between themselves first, and then they will answer questions from you, the participants. So please have your questions ready, so it's nice and organized for tomorrow. In case you cannot come to tomorrow's session, we'd just like to invite you all to the next Pari Center series of the summer, entitled Beyond Bohm, Science, Order, and Creativity. I know Bohm has come up a few times this session. So in this series, it's going to be a great opportunity to hear and dialogue with those involved in the many aspects of David Bohm's work, and to discuss the implications of his ideas in the future. The event will be divided in two parts. In July, we will focus on Bohm's physics and science, and we'll have the subtitle Physics and Metaphysics. While the second part, which will take place in August, we will look more at Bohm's thought and philosophy, and will be called Contemplation and Creativity. If you want to know more about this, you can visit our website or contact us directly. To contact us, there's a contact us section on the website, or you could just send us an email straight directly to us at james@paricenter.com to contact me, or eleanor@paricenter.com to contact Eleanor. Thank you again, Richard. Thank you again all for joining us, and we'll see you again soon here at the Pari Center.